It started with the murder of their prophet in Illinois. Joseph Smith, leader of 26,000 Mormons, father to 14 children, husband to 40 wives. The prophet, seer, and revelator was dead, and the Mormons were under attack, so they fled. They found safety in the mountains of Mexico, where they would go on to build their own utopian society. We're starting in the 1840s, when the Mormons are kicked out of Illinois and Missouri, and they make this 1,000-mile, grueling journey into what was then the remote mountains of Mexico.
Your forefathers and mine came to this country in the first place for one great reason: to escape persecution for their beliefs, and to build a free country where everybody might worship God as he pleased.
Yes, all of this was Mexico for a very long time. The Mormons believed, and still do believe, that someday they would return to the sacred land of Jackson County, Missouri, where they would help usher in the end of the world and the second coming of Jesus Christ. But for now, they would build Zion in the mountains of Mexico, far away from the American government and people. Or at least, so they thought. And this is where things get really interesting to me, because right after the Mormons arrive to these mountains, they start building. And they start building fast. They use the same designs that Joseph Smith had drawn up for the city of Zion, placing the Holy Temple at the center. Around this temple, they would build their city as a perfect grid. But what's most impressive to me is how well they cooperated and coordinated with each other, how motivated they were, how industrious and productive they were. They worked tirelessly for their vision of Zion. And this became a core part of the Mormon identity. They ended up adopting the beehive as a metaphor for their community, a group of industrious, highly motivated people, all working together for a common goal. According to the Mormon scriptures, the Book of Mormon, there's an ancient word for honeybee. That word is Deseret. And Deseret would soon be the name of their proposed state. And it became a foundational symbol for these people building their Zion in the mountains of Mexico. And right in the middle of all of this group of industrious Mormons, driven by obedience and sacrifice and a commitment to communal living, preparing for the end of the world, for the millennium. This is a tension that will blow up in just a second. But first, we need to talk about how popular the Mormon Zion was becoming. Brigham Young had sent missionaries all over, but especially to Europe, to the west coast of England specifically, where these missionaries would preach the word of the restoration of the gospel and the building of Zion in the American West. And it really was effective. Their network of settlements created a complex economy that was run by the church, who directed everything: where to build, what to build. Soon they had their own currency. They made these really unique coins, some featuring their unique symbols, handshakes, and a reminder that union is strength. Or here we see the beehive again, and a reminder to do your duty. They're building sugar mills and processing iron and building factories. And they even invented their own writing system, like their own alphabet, which was meant to unify the people around a common way to spell and pronounce words. I actually have a reprint here of the Deseret alphabet. They never taught us how to read this, which I'm kind of bummed about because I would love to know what this all says. But there was a big problem for the Mormons, which is that this was all now the United States, and the federal government was exerting more and more control west as more and more people settled out there. Once again, this could be the end of the Mormons' vision of Zion. So they acted very quickly and decided to propose a state of their own, telling the government that, hey, we know you didn't like us settling in Missouri or Illinois, but we're out here in the West, and we've settled and developed all of this land in a really short time. Please let us have our own state so that we can practice our religion as we please. And what is the state that they proposed? This massive shape. Take a moment to soak this in. Look at where we are here. These borders for the proposed Mormon state encompass parts of modern-day Arizona, Southern California, Colorado, Idaho, New Mexico, Oregon, Wyoming, and Utah. This thing is huge. If it had become a state, the modern United States would look something like this. Bigger than Washington, Oregon, and California combined. And they would call it the State of Deseret. They were serious. They drafted a constitution, and they lobbied hard for their state. And the US government, Said absolutely not. Of course not. The government didn't love that the Mormons were building this theocratic society that was completely independent from the United States. But they did kind of like how industrious the Mormons were, how effective they were at settling this land, displacing the natives, and building up communities for white people. This is something the United States was doing at the time. It was their manifest destiny, and the Mormons were really good at it. So, in order to keep the Mormons productively settling the land that they had just won from Mexico, the federal government does grant them this territory. Not as big as the state of Deseret, but still a nice big territory, and they let Brigham Young, the prophet of the church, be the first governor. Now, the U.S. Congress did not want to name this after a word from the Book of Mormon that means beehive, so they named it Utah, after the local Ute natives who this land had been taken from. Little fun side note here, the Washington Monument here in Washington, D.C. was built using stones from every state and territory. And as this negotiation was going down, the stone that made it into the Washington Monument says Deseret, not Utah. It's got the beehive and a big I that says holiness to the Lord, like the most Mormon symbol you could ever have right here in the Washington Monument. So the Mormons now have a territory called Utah Territory. It's not a state yet. President Brigham Young is their governor and their prophet, and they can continue to build Zion in peace. But the government now sort of has an eye on them. They send in some federal employees to keep an eye on the Mormons, make sure they don't get too revolutionary with their theocratic government and their apocalyptic ideas. They're once again back on the government's radar. The government's like, they better start behaving like Americans. They need to quit it with the whole, we're making our own government and society for the coming of Jesus thing, or things are going to get messy. And now we have to talk about polygamy. Some of you have been waiting the whole time to hear me talk about polygamy. Well, here it goes. You'll remember from part 1 that when Joseph Smith was the leader of the church, he came out and said that the Lord had commanded him to take multiple wives, that this was a part of the new and everlasting covenant, which is the law of marriage for Mormons. Joseph ended up marrying around 40 women in his lifetime, some of them very young. But polygamy wasn't for everyone at first. Joseph invited a few select church leaders and people in his circle to participate in polygamy. And they continued doing that. Brigham Young also did this, but in kind of a hush-hush way for a bit. That is until 1852, a couple of years after Utah Territory was created. Prophet Brigham Young stands at the pulpit of this very beautiful building and tells the members of the church that plural marriage, or polygamy, is a divine law from God, a superior way of life, practiced by the prophets of old. And in this conference, he cites Joseph Smith's revelation on marriage, saying that marriage, including plural marriage or polygamy, is the only way to be exalted, which is the Mormon way of saying to become a god, which is the ultimate goal in Mormon doctrine. The thinking was that plural marriage would allow more worthy women to marry a worthy man and have the opportunity to be exalted. Brigham Young went on to marry 56 wives. He had kids with 16 of them, 57 children in total. Some of these wives were older widows that Brigham said he married just to take care of them, and some of them were 13 years old. So now that the prophet had openly endorsed it, it was public, this was out, more and more Mormon men began practicing polygamy, taking mostly younger women as their extra wives. Mainstream Mormons did eventually get totally on board and do not practice polygamy in any kind of significant way. And Utah was eventually made a state. Today, the descendants of those original pioneers live in Mormon communities along this corridor that Brigham Young settled. My wife and I went to school right here in the heart of it, in this beautiful valley surrounded by these massive mountains, feeling close to the specific sugar-coated version of this history that I was taught. These stories of struggle and conflict, sacrifice in the name of your beliefs, bravery in the face of persecution, a work ethic and a discipline and an obedience that I was shaped by. A huge part of my identity and the identity of a lot of LDS people. But what I've learned is that that identity is deeply linked to exploitation and apocalyptic thinking, exploitation of Mormon women and children, the theft of native land, obedience to a God whose will is strangely aligned with the incentives of men. A belief that the world will end any day, which justifies all of this. A confirmation that we were the chosen people, the real Israel, called of God to prepare the world for the end, to gather the tribes before the Savior's return. I still don't fully understand how I could find such meaning and beauty in something that I now find to be so wrong, to be so damaging.